Hey guys, Steph FOWLER here. I'm super excited to be chatting today about meat and human health. I do have to apologize for the somewhat vague presentation title. I was so excited when Tracy asked me to present at this year's summit that I was too busy picking my chin up off the floor to actually come up with anything more prescriptive. So this is the title we went with. Before I do sink into that though, I think it's really important to understand if we're going to take information or advice off people, where their educations come from and where their experience lies, just so that we can better understand their perception and where their biases may be. So I grew up on the Central Coast of New South Wales. I got into agriculture through showing cows at high school. Every year we'd have a handful of cows that we would get in, we would feed them up, we would break them into halter, and we would compete and take them to competitions. This got me also into judging cattle. So not only showing the cows off and them being assessed on their meat quality and how much meat they had, but also for us to be able to assess different animals and be able to say which one were more suited or had better commercial and production quality traits. So from high school, my love of cows developed, and I ended up after high school going to ag college. I started actually with a certificate 3 in horse husbandry. I'm an avid horse rider as well, got bitten by the horse bug shortly after the cow bug, and I don't think I've looked back since. So as part of my studies, I went on to do a certificate 3 and 4 in ag, which is more of a commercial based. It gave me a better understanding of the actual practices that commercial farmers did, as opposed to stud producers. And then I was able to put together both my love of cattle and horses. And when my mum died in 2005 and I lacked direction, ended up working on a station in Northern Territory. So we were on a station of 80,000 head of cows and calves. And this for me is one of those pivotal moments. It really defined where I was heading. So we were on a station that had an old school manager. He didn't like buying in lamb or chicken. So we did a lot of our own on-farm kills. And that's where I was really introduced to the idea of the conversion from a live animal to the food that we eat. So what muscles were what cuts. You'll see there's a photo there of me actually doing an on-farm kill myself, really understanding how the live animal translates into food. And that's something that I then took forward with me. I ended up applying for university. I got in, and then 2 weeks after I put in my application, I broke my foot in a motorbike accident. So when I went to undergraduate, I did a Bachelor of Ag, and then that was a really, really broad kind of understanding again of kind of the commercial farming systems. We did everything from soils and agronomy right the way through to animal production and the products. And then I went on and did my honours degree looking at hormonal growth promotants, and then a PhD looking at the development of a probe to measure meat quality traits. So lots of commercial focus throughout my early career, which then led me into my current role as a meat scientist at the Department of Primary Industries. So I loosely say at the moment that my projects that I work on cover 3 kind of basic meat quality areas. So the first is looking at yield, so the proportion of bone, fat, and saleable meat on a carcass, and how do we measure and define that so that we can translate that throughout the supply chain. I also look at the prediction or the measurement of meat quality and eating quality traits. So that's everything from shelf life to color, to the oxidation of both the fat and the protein, to consumers' eating experience, and can we predict that without destroying the product. I also have gotten more into traceability recently. So a big project that I'm working on at the moment is looking at verifying grass and grain-fed beef products, which attract a premium price point of sale, and saying that definitively that yes, the cows have been produced in that. So because that's based on the fatty acid composition within the production system, so we know that grass-fed beef has a higher amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And then I use a technology to basically measure those without me having to destroy it. That's kind of led me more into compositional type research and really interested in the nutritional aspects of meat as well, which happens to be a really good point where my personal and my career kind of meld together into one giant pool. So in his book, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 7 mistakes of fatal plane crashes. So crews can make 5 or 6 crashes, 5 or 6 mistakes and have no crash and it's all fine. But if they make 7 mistakes, it inevitably ends up in a fatal crash. So this photo for me, I guess, is kind of that fatal crash. In 2015, Christmas Eve, I came off a young pony I was breaking in and I broke my wrist. I did a pretty good job. It was a pretty complex break. I broke both the bones, and instead of being the typical 6 weeks that people expect a broken bone to heal in, it turned into about 6 months. The limb kept swelling and going away. It wasn't plastered well, and so on and so on and so on, and so it goes. And in that period, it was the first time that I'd actually sat down. I was pretty active, and I hadn't really sat down in probably close to 15 years since mum died, 10 years since mum died. And all of the trauma and all of the things that I've been running away from eventually caught up with me. So I spent the 6 months eating my emotions. Not great. I put on about 20 kilos of weight. I then had a whole stack of issues, which included falling asleep at the desk. Lunchtime, I was going to bed at 7 p.m. and I couldn't get out of bed at 7 a.m. I was really struggling just to get through my days. So as we all do, I went to the doctor, and the doctor said to me, "Hey, Steph, you're obviously lying about what you're eating. You must be, eating a lot more junk food because normal people can lose weight. So just go and lose the weight. Just join one of those 12-week body transformation things." And so I did. And this is the result. The first photo on the left is me at the end of that. And I was pretty disappointed and devastated. I ended up only losing 4 kilos. Everybody gets on and says, that must be because you're lying. You obviously aren't doing it by the book. All of the excuses and things come out. And I didn't know where to do or what to turn. And a friend of mine actually posted on Facebook that she was seeing a new doctor. Doctor put her on low carb. She was losing all this weight. And I thought, my God, I need to see this woman. And so I did. And that was the start of 4 years of being looked after by that doctor. And in that time, we unpacked a whole heap of things. It turns out that I have a skin condition, which is basically like PCOS, except instead of your ovaries getting the cysts, it's your skin. And then there's endocrine disruption. So I ended up on metformin to help squash some of that. There's insulin resistance. Again, metformin helped with some of that. And the low carb diet. And lo and behold, I've now lost 18 kilos. I'm back to being the energetic self that I once was. I can get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. I can go to sleep at 10 o'clock at night. I'm back to being me. So I'm super, super excited to have found the pieces on that health journey. So now let's meld the two things together and look at the role of actual meat and what that does in human health. So I always like to go back to the definition of words. Health being defined as the state of being either physical or mental condition free of disease or illness. And for me, I think I stole this actually off Tracy, but for me, health is a bit of a puzzle. We know that there's some pieces of the puzzle. We don't know that there's other pieces of the puzzle. And it's kind of our responsibility to go through and find the pieces of the puzzle through trial and error that kind of fit us and fit our unique situation and who we are as individuals. So diet, of course, is one of those. And meat is part of that diet, or can be part of that diet, should be part of that diet. So meat is defined as the flesh of animal, mammal, or bird. And I have perhaps intentionally left out fish and seafood from this today. I am very much a red meat guru. So there may also not be much talk of birds and poultry, but I will say that is my bias, and they're certainly part of the system. So what is actually meat? When we think about meat, we basically think about protein. I'm not going to scare you with too much science, but I just want to highlight the different structures of the actual skeletal muscle. Because when we, of course, are eating meat, we are eating mammalian skeletal muscle, which is exactly the same in terms of its elemental composition. and it's biochemistry as our muscles, and they operate in the exact same way. So meat as a whole is generally mostly water, but as well as the water, we all know that meat's pretty high in protein. So there's various different proteins. They're either contractile, like actin and myosin, or they're structural, either structural within the myofibril, so the actual muscle cell itself, or within the connective tissue that surrounds each bundle and each actual muscle. So it's also, I think, important to note that the muscles themselves also have their own supply of nerves and capillaries. We all know this. And that is, in fact, what helps it to contract. So some of the smaller components of muscles are the actual metabolites and things that are required for both respiration, so things like oxygen, the blood supply, that sort of stuff through myoglobin, and also the actual inorganic metabolites and the minerals and things like that that are needed for contraction. So once again, I won't scare you too much with science, but I think that we often forget that meat is actually muscle. So it's not just a source of protein for these reasons, because the animals need, the inorganic phosphates, the ADP, the ATP, the magnesium, the calcium, the salt, the same way that we do to keep their muscles functioning normally. What does this all mean though? So when we talk about meats, there's obviously two kinds of meat, red meat and white meat. And the actual structure and the muscle fibers and the type of muscle fibers are what make these differences. So the poultry are more of your white muscle type, and your livestock animals are more of the red muscle type. I kind of disagree with pork and pigs being put in red meat, but I guess there's a little bit of contention on the inside as to whether or not they are. I think in Australia they have actually been now labelled as more of a red meat than a white meat, but I kind of disagree there. So the key point with this, when we're thinking about what meat to select at the supermarket or what we're going to plan to eat for the week, is that the contractile and metabolic types actually vary within both of these types of meat and types of muscle, so that the content of both the proteins and the minerals that we're eating, as well as the composition and the distribution of connective tissue, the fat, so the intramuscular and the intermuscular fat, play a role in how these muscles operate within the animal, and therefore change their nutritional composition when we go to cook them. So I guess it's that whole thing of, the chicken being really high in protein but really low in fat. Pork is also one of those things that's really high in protein, really low in fat, whereas your lamb and your beef are generally tend to be higher in fat than some of the other meats. Other things like goat and deer and horse are really generally quite lean. So we can target specific meats to meet our individual needs for fat and protein based on what species we're actually eating in comparison to, I guess, other species. So that's something to be kind of aware of. And that does come down to, how those muscles, what those muscles are actually aimed to do, whether they aim to be a really quick firing muscle or whether they aim to be a slower firing muscle and provide more strength than speed. So if you think about the difference between a chicken flying away and a cow running away, there's a short, quick, fast action of a chicken flying versus a really slow, I guess they can still go fast, but it's a slower kind of, more strength involved with the muscles of a cow to carry the bigger animal. The thing that also varies, and we want to think about when we're selecting meats that might suit our individual needs, is also the cuts. So not all meat cuts are created the same. So, and there's a lot of research that backs this up, but the general gist of it is this. So all of the muscles and all of the meat cuts that come from the back of the animal are more structural muscles. So their job is to basically hold the animal in its form. So if we think about our back and how our back operates versus how we use our limbs, it's no different to the cow. So within the animal itself, there's also slight variations between the muscle fiber types, and therefore the minerals, the meat quality, and the different types of protein based around whether or not the muscle is a locomotive muscle or whether or not it's a structural muscle. So with the locomotive muscles, what we notice is they're generally higher in things like zinc and iron and magnesium and calcium and sodium, because they're all the metabolites and all the things that are needed to basically enable the animal to move. So structural muscles, because they don't move much, they're generally nicer to eat. Particularly in Australia, we generally tend to gravitate towards eating, things like Scotch fillet, sirloin steak, porterhouse, all those sort of cuts that are actually structural muscles, because we like to barbecue, we like to grill. And what I would say is that we generally need to eat, and taking out offal, but we generally need to eat more of the animal. So we know that things like topside that comes from the back end, a hind quarter, brisket and shoulder, because they are more locomotive muscles, they're higher in minerals and vitamins, which means that if we're eating across the animal, there's more of a chance that we will actually meet our recommended daily intakes for some of those things, which can be particularly important, specifically for females that are aiming to get their iron, and also for people that are pregnant that might have higher needs for zinc and some of those other minerals as well. So I just want to highlight, not all meats are created equal. And while we have a bias, we generally want to gravitate towards those nicer, more tender cuts. We do underutilize the whole animal, and we do need to increase, our consumption of some of these different cuts to get the best mineral and get the best nutrition out of our meals. Something else I want to briefly touch on is production system. I generally get asked this quite a lot about, should we all be eating organic, grass-fed, all that sort of stuff. And while we do know that the grass feeding increases the polyunsaturated, it is an interesting epidemiological question on the basis that I don't actually know whether saturated fats are as bad for us as we say, or as it's been said. Something that I guess isn't really noted is that in traditional, back in hunter-gatherer days, I think there would also be a period where some of the grasses are actually going to seeds. And because the seed and the grain is higher in energy and its energy density, animals will preferentially graze some of those in comparison to just a straight grass. And so there would have been periods, particularly in spring and summer, when a lot of the native sort of grasses would have been going to seed and animals would have been higher in saturated fats. I'm not really sure that we can definitively say it's good or bad, but I also know that, we probably have pushed that a little bit too far in some instances. In Australia, most of the meat that's in the supermarket is a 70-day grain-fed product because it's consistent in terms of its eating quality. But whether or not that level of saturation is bad for us, I mean, I wouldn't recommend probably eating 300-day fed beef for a very long period of time, but it's so expensive, I doubt that many people would be able to afford to do that anyway. I would certainly like to see more research looking at the impact of saturated fats from animals when we do have like a better overall diet, when we're not eating, the processed foods and all that sort of stuff. Because a lot of the epidemiological studies that have said that saturated fats, which are associated with grain-fed products, are bad for us. The people that are eating a high amount of saturated fat from animal products are also eating a large amount of processed products. They're also eating, having a lot of beer. There's a big healthy user bias around a lot of these studies that are looking at production system of origin. So there does need to be more research in that sort of area. And I don't want it to be something where people, go away from eating red meat because they can't afford the organic, biodynamic, pasture-fed this. I certainly don't eat that all the time. I barely eat it because I just can't buy it where I live. So my advice on production system and, and this sort of stuff is to do the best you can with what you've got. So if you can afford the grass-fed, U-Butte, high-quality meat, go for it. If you can't, just do the best with what you've got. I do want to also flag, though, there's more to human health than just diet. And I think it's really interesting to note over the years that meat, particularly red meat, is very much a cultural and a social thing as well. So we have this thing where we really want to, I guess, be inclusive of, you know, our traditions and a lot of, you know, you think about Christmas and a lot of families come together for a roast. There's a special occasion, people come together for a Sunday roast. And it really is something that I think is underplayed in terms of human nutrition. You know, this dynamic between what we eat and our culture and our social bonds and our connection. We are wired to be connected people. We are wired to seek that connection. And so that does mean, you know, coming together for a Sunday roast. It does mean, you know, this notion that we can separate out who we are or what we do from some of our traditions is completely, I guess it just kind of fries my head a bit. So my advice to people on this score would be to, you know, enjoy it. Enjoy your barbecues, enjoy your social occasions, enjoy your roast. Don't fear eating meat or being part of that. I wouldn't, you know, again, it's just based on an individual and what fits for the individual. But I really think it's important to note this. It's interesting, you know, over the years, there's been this big decline in particularly older people. You know, they're tending to shy away from eating red meats, something that they wouldn't have necessarily done in their older days because they're fearing the health implications of higher fat and things like that. And now we have this issue around sarcopenic obesity, where you're getting increasing BMI with a decreasing muscle mass. And so I think it's really important to take a step back and to look at the whole picture and to incorporate meat as you would in part of your traditions and not be scared to include that. I just wanted to also briefly touch on some of my pet peeves. This could also be labeled as inconvenient, uneducated opinions on social media and the internet. And it really kind of frustrates me somewhat that we're not having broader discussions around meat and its role. It's kind of been labeled as this bad food, and, you know, particularly red meat. We're not going to eat red meat. Don't eat red meat. It's bad for you. You'll die of a heart attack. And what we're not talking about is the actual quality of the proteins. So, you know, you can Google things like high protein and you get smashed with a whole heap of, here's, you know, 9 plant foods that are higher in protein than eggs. Here's, you know, 15 vegetarian options for protein that don't include nuts or cheese. Like, and what's not acknowledged is that animal sources of protein, including meat, they contain all the essential amino acids. They're complete proteins. They're really bioavailable. They're, you know, this fries my head completely. What we're not talking about when we talk about plant proteins is that they're not complete proteins. You know, they don't have all the essential amino acids. And we do have essential amino acids and we do have essential fatty acids. And the more of those essential, so they're the ones that we can't actually synthesize ourselves. And the more of those that are in a product, the better, I'm going to say, the more nutritionally dense that is. And it really does get up me that we're not discussing in terms of these protein, you know, plant protein sources, that they are missing the essential nutrients. They are missing essential amino acids. And we don't talk about it, we don't promote meat as being something which does contain all of the, you know, it's a quality protein. It's got all the essential amino acids in it. And it's the same story when you think about things like zinc and iron. I don't know how many times I get on Instagram and see you know, you want to increase your this, eat these plant protein sources, eat these plant mineral, you know, iron, zinc, whatever the case may be. And what we're not talking about with this is the bioavailability. So I'm not debating that things like spinach are higher in iron. You know, we have the data that says that. But when we do it in the lab, when the nutritional studies are done, there's no way of understanding. It's done in a chemical dish. There's no way of understanding from that individual study what the actual bioavailability of that is. And we do know that heme iron, which is in meat, in red meats particularly, is more bioavailable than non-heme plant iron. And I would assume that it's going to be the same, pretty well the same with a lot of those sort of minerals. I know it's the same, B12, all the B vitamins are more bioavailable in meat than they are in plant sources. But again, it's another thing that we don't talk about because meat has been tainted as being high in saturated fats and therefore bad. And it's just really, quite a sad thing that we're going to have to address as both a meat industry, but also as, as a nutrition discussion overall, because it's like comparing apples and oranges and saying, well, an apple's not an orange. Well, we know this, but we need to get a bit more in depth about what some of the bioavailability is, because 1 gram doesn't equal 1 gram absorbed. But we don't talk about it. Instagram doesn't talk about it. I will say though too, it depends, it's all relative. It depends on where you're coming from. So people do go on even a low carb vegetarian diet, and you can get a balanced diet, but it's really got to be done in a way that is so planned and so thought out and so understood to make sure that we are getting the amounts and the availability and the minerals in an available form to ensure that we can be healthy. So again, I wouldn't say don't eat it. That might not be the case for everybody. It's really about being informed about selecting the right form of the mineral or the right meat cut to meet your individual needs, and having a look. On that though, another really, it irks me, it really does, is our nutritional, the actual information that's being put out there. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but you can actually get on the Nut tab, the nutritional information that's put out by Food Standards Australia. And this is, again, it's a really tricky area to kind of do research in, because there's so many factors. We know that genetics, we know that feeding systems, we know that seasons, we know that there's so many variable things. Each animal is as individual in its nutritional composition as we are individual human beings. And then what we want to do is we want to be able to say, well, here is the macros and the micronutrients for this particular cut, and it's just something which is incredibly tricky to do. So they've done the best with what they can, but it doesn't necessarily stack up. So part of it is the language. If you look at the picture on the left, it's really hard to actually distinguish. I mean, I'm in the game and I wouldn't be able to tell, pick out which one of those. And there was about, when I looked up beef, there was about 7 or 8 different pages that had, every beef cut imaginable of man. And it's just so unclear. When we talk about, the all cut separable fat, well, what is separable fat? Do we actually understand that? And so when you click on something, it comes up, and it actually, you can click on the number and it'll come up and it'll tell you about what it is, where it was sampled, and give you the list of the references of the studies that they've pulled this information out of. And this is a bit of a pet peeve, mainly for the reason that, you read the sampling details that I've got on the right, and they've got 10 samples of cooked beef cuts purchased in Melbourne and Sydney in 2002. Fatty acids derived from 5 pool composite of 10 beef cuts. So we're talking about a really small sample number. Despite all of the factors that we know will vary the nutritional composition of meat, we've got a really small amount, a small sample number. And then we're saying to people, and we're saying to nutritionists, go out there, tell people to eat exactly this amount of meat to get exactly this amount of whatever it may be, protein, zinc, iron, you name it. And it just doesn't stack up in my head. It doesn't translate. There needs to be a heap more data. And I really think that as consumers, we need to be, as people buying meat, we need to be pushing for this. And as people producing, as farmers producing meat, they need to be pushing for this, because, it's really hard to actually work out how good or how nutrient dense meat is when we don't fully understand how all of the sources of variation, and there's not a lot of nutritional information out there on the different cuts. There's not a lot of nutritional information out there on, how does it vary from year to year, or how does it vary with the animal genetics, or how does it vary from pasture to grain. So it just, there needs to be a broader understanding, and we're trying to move the production systems into more value-based trading systems. So we're trying to identify what people want to eat and then produce something that matches what people want to eat, but we're not aligning that on a nutritional level. And that just, again, it just blows my brain, because this is what people's lives and health are being, this is the information that we're using to determine what meat am I going to eat, what meat am I not going to eat, how does this fit in? Do I need more protein, less protein, more fat, less fat? And they've done the best they could, but it's not very accurate. So yeah, massive pet peeve. Heaps more research needs to be done. So out of all of this, what do I recommend? So, and it's a little bit tricky, because I don't know who's on the receiving end of this, and the scientist in me really wants to add up with like what your need is. So I guess my 2 key points that I hope that you've taken out of this is, A, to do the best with what you have. I can't reiterate that enough. Again, if you don't have the ability to go out there and buy, the organic, biodynamic, if you can, that's great. If you can't, just get the best that you can. But in saying that, eat a variety of different meats. Different meats have different nutritional compositions because of the different metabolic types and the different muscle fiber types and all that sort of stuff. So eat a variety of meats. Eat pork, lamb. Find the ones that work for you. Find out what you need. But within that too, eat different cuts and cook them differently. Cooking is something, and the different cooking methods and the impact that has on the cooking loss, and therefore the nutritional composition, hasn't really been established either. So my biggest thing is to just, I think you're going to end up with nutritional deficiencies if you stick to one meat over a long period of time, but it's like that with anything. So I would really say to just, do the best with what you can, but within that, eat a variety, and cook it in a different way. Keep things interesting. Anyway, thanks, guys. Really appreciate the chance to share a small portion of my knowledge with you all. If you do want to keep in touch, at the moment, I don't really have much. I'm halfway through a master's of nutrition myself, hoping to become a registered nutritionist and pull together and spread the word on the value of meat a little bit more. But you can find me on Facebook, Steph Fowler. I am also putting together, I do also have an equestrian page, but I'm putting together, hopefully, something that pulls together some of these puzzle pieces, including nutrition, specifically for riders. I think there's a lot of body shaming and a lot of fat shaming people that are just basically doing the best they can with the information they have. And I'm just really keen to provide people with better information. So hopefully I'll pull something together over the next little while, and that'll be available. But Instagram, again, I'm on there. Happy days. Well, thanks very much. Hopefully you all got something out of that. And I appreciate the opportunity to chat to you all.